Because of how important DHCP is in a network, in a larger network, we will sometimes want to set up a redundant DHCP server or a highly available DHCP server. So what we're trying to do is eliminate single points of failure. If something fails, we want DHCP to continue to function. So we've got a few options for how to do this. Now, I'm on my primary server where I have my DHCP scope that I created. Now, if I want to make this a highly available DHCP scope, I can right-click on my scope, and I've got two things here. I've got my advanced, which will let me do a split scope, and I've got the option to configure a failover. And we'll walk through the options. I'm not going to go ahead and apply it, but we'll walk through the options so you can see how we do this. Let's start out with a split scope. So in a split scope, what we'll do is we'll have two DHCP servers. So you'll see right here, splitting the scope between multiple DHCP servers can increase fault tolerance, blah, blah, blah. You can read that later on. I'm going to click Next. So I'm going to add my additional DHCP server. Now in this simulated network, I actually do have another one. It's on a child domain. So what we would do is we'd click on Add, and then I can choose an authorized DHCP server, and it's not actually showing up here for me. The reason it's not is because it's in a child domain, and I didn't want to rebuild another one for the purposes of this demo. So I'll just show you how we can browse and find it. So with this server selected, I'm going to click on Browse. And then here, because it's in a child domain, normally I just type in the one that I want. It happens to be server 3. So I do a server 3 and check name. And it actually did find it for me, go figure. If it doesn't find it, then we can go to Locations and select Look in Child and look for server 3. And here it finds child/server 3. Okay, cool. That's exactly what I want. So I click OK, and that identifies, hey, now we're doing it with this server, server 3. So I'm going to click OK. And then we have our additional server and the IP address of our current server. So we're going to click Next. And this is where we do a split scope. Now, the way split scope typically works, the idea behind it is we have both DHCP servers serving the same IP address range. We want one of them to be the primary and one of them to be the secondary, typically. And with the one being the primary, we want it to respond first, and we want it to have most of the addresses. So you see here my address range is from 10.1.1.50 to 10.1.1.150. And so the default here is, let's have our host DHCP server, so the first one, have 80% of the addresses, and this one would have 20. Now if I change that, let me change this to hit my number lock key, that'll work better. Let me go 70, then this would automatically adjust to 30. And down here, the start and the ending addresses are being bounced around a little bit too. Okay, so that's the idea. Bulk of our addresses come off of this server. This one picks up if we need it. Now, the way we adjust that is here on the next one where we specify a delay in milliseconds. So what happens is both servers will get the DHCP request from the client. So we'll typically set one server to respond immediately and the other one to respond a little bit later. And the reason we do that is so clients get it from the primary server that we want. So we'd set this to, let's do 1,000 milliseconds is normally a pretty decent time. So the primary DHCP server, the host in this case, responds first and the added DHCP server responds second. And if for some reason the client doesn't get a response from the host DHCP server, the one we want to be primary, then it will take the one it gets from the second one. And you might have to play around with these timings a little bit. But that's it. That's all we have to do to set up the scope. If I click Finish, since both of these DHCP servers are in the same domain, and I am domain admin, and I've already installed a DHCP server, by the way. I had to install DHCP server down here and authorize it, and then I could do things like this. So it will automatically configure for me. Now let's take a look at a couple of other options. So we did the split scope. We can also configure a failover. And this is going to be kind of similar in that we're going to set a partner server. So same thing, I'm going to add server. I'm going to browse and I'm going to search for server 3. click my check name and see it. Whoops, I typed server 4. That won't work. Let's do server 3. And there we go. We find in the child subdomain server 3. Okay, cool. So I'm going to click OK, and now we have a partner server. Now, there's two different ways I can configure this. One is as a load balancing mode. So in load balancing mode, we have 50% allocated to the local server, 50% to the partner server is our terminology. It won't let me go next until I put in a shared secret. And so what's going to happen is these two will talk with each other. So they will both know, hey, these are the addresses I've leased. So both of them will have a full copy of the database and not just their copy. And that database that I'm talking about is the mappings database, which shows this IP address is mapped to this server or this MAC address for this amount of time. So I would put in, I can disable message authentication or I can enable it, and then I do a shared secret. Do a shared secret, so it will encrypt the message between the two. And then next, and that's pretty much it, right? So that's load balancing. The other option is to do a hot standby. And with a hot standby, then what we do is we set one of them to be the active server and one of them to be the standby server. So in this case, the partner server would be the standby. And if I changed it, I could make the partner server the active one if I wanted to. But in this case, the partner server will be the standby. And notice now we're only allowing 5% of the addresses to go to the standby server. So in a load balancing, both of them will respond to DHCP requests. In a hot standby one, the standby one will not. So everything will go to the hot server, and if the hot server goes down, then the standby server will pick it up. And again, they're going to communicate with each other, and if we want it encrypted, we do a shared secret. And again, it's just a one-page wizard. So those are some options there for you to do highly available DHCP servers in your network.